A Fox News alert and a live update on that deadly Amtrak train derailment of 2 days ago. This in DuPont, Washington. We are getting ready to hear from the State Secretary of Transportation, a news conference to begin momentarily. That's what the empty microphone is there. And they have done a spectacular job of getting ready to reopen I-5. Right now, the southbound lanes remain closed. They're getting ready to remove a locomotive. Obviously, the heavy lifting portion of this. Once they get that done, they'll bring in some highway people to fix the guardrails and patch whatever asphalt they need to patch. And then they will reopen the southbound lanes of I-5. That locomotive is scheduled to be loaded up today and driven off. They have found that the bridge itself, from which those train cars fell, is structurally sound. They hope to have Interstate 5 opened later today. And this Fox News alert as President Trump is on the verge of his biggest legislative victory to date, with the House set to take a final vote on the GOP tax bill. Should happen any minute now. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Heather Childers, but anything could happen.
Well, yeah,
as was proven yesterday. We're live on Capitol Hill, awaiting action on the House floor after the Senate narrowly passed the most sweeping tax overhaul in decades. They voted along party lines as expected, but it was tweaked. The version that was passed in the House was tweaked to satisfy procedural rules, which is why House lawmakers will now take a final vote on the bill that includes a $1.5 trillion tax cut, one that House Speaker Paul Ryan says will help hardworking families.
All tax rates go down. The top rate and every rate in between are lowered. So you get lower rates across the board. Number two, we double the standard deduction. That means you go to you can see our postcard. I like to bring this thing up. Still, nearly 9 out of 10 people in America will be able to do their taxes on the form the size of a postcard.
We have live Team Fox coverage with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts, but we start with Peter Doocy. He's on Capitol Hill. Peter?
John, there was very loud applause on the right side of the room very early this morning when the Vice President Mike Pence, who was presiding over the Senate, announced that the upper chamber had passed this tax reform package without any Democratic support. And just in case any constituents were sleeping while this happened, Republicans are trying to remind constituents what happened.
We did come to Washington to grow the economy, to give people more freedom. And Nancy Pelosi and folks like her come to Washington to grow the government. I mean, that is fundamentally the difference.
But Democrats are still smarting that the GOP never really tried to collaborate with them on the tax package. And they're trying to shine a spotlight on parliamentary problems that slowed the majority down. The whole reason the House has to vote again today is because Senators Bernie Sanders and Ron Wyden complained that certain education provisions broke budget rules and the name of the bill didn't comply either. So once those things were stripped out, the Senate ended up voting on a different bill than the House. And House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi says, quote, "The House revote is the latest evidence of just how shoddily written the GOP tax scam really is. The wealthy and well-connected will be exploiting the hidden loopholes and giveaways in the GOP tax scam for years to come." We think that we are about an hour away from the House doing this revote, and then, assuming that it passes again, like yesterday, they can start this funding fight over how to keep the government open and avoid a shutdown this weekend. One sticking point had been DACA, but Senator Jeff Flake tweeted very early this morning that that is going to be addressed in January. Back to you.
All right, Peter Doocy, keeping an eye on all of the drama on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Peter.
And, of course, the White House is now reacting to the big developments on tax reform as we await, as we've told you, that House revote on the final bill, which cleared the Senate overnight. It is expected to pass easily, sending it to President Trump's desk to be signed into law as early as next week. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is here live with more on that. Now, the timing of all this, of course, it's coinciding with Christmas and vacations.
Yeah, and you've got at least a 10-day period here where not much is going to get done, though they will be working hard at the White House here to review that tax reform bill. The president, meantime, Heather, getting ready for a big celebration a little later on today at the White House after the vote to realign the bills in the House. The president planning to have a lot of members of Congress over here to the White House, likely a Rose Garden event to celebrate the passage of the bill, though the signing will come later. We'll get into the timetable of that in just a second. The president tweeting out a little while ago this morning, quote, "The tax cuts are so large and so meaningful, and yet fake news is working overtime to follow the lead of their friends, the defeated Dems, and only demean. This is truly a case where the results will speak for themselves starting very soon. Jobs, jobs, jobs." So what is in the final bill? It reduces the corporate tax rate to 21% from 35% in terms of tax cuts. Families earning between $49,000 and $86,000 will get an average tax cut of $930. Those earning between $86,000 and $149,000 will see an average tax cut of $1,800. Many of these tax cuts, by the way, are going to sunset by 2026. It's the intention for the corporate tax to remain permanent. And the SALT write-offs, that is the state and local tax deduction write-offs, decrease. People will only be able to deduct $10,000 of those taxes going forward. What's not in this bill is closing the carried interest loophole. The president promised again and again on the campaign trail and as president when he was going through tax reform that he was going to close this loophole, which allows millionaire hedge fund managers to pay an effective tax rate of about 24% instead of near 41%. The president's chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, at a forum this morning says they tried to close that loophole but couldn't. Listen here.
We would have cut carried interest. We've been trying to cut carried interest. We probably tried 25 times. We hit opposition in that big white building with the dome at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue every time we tried.
Hit opposition in the building with the big white dome at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Sources tell Fox News that was the Republican leadership who would not even allow that measure on the table because those folks in Congress get a lot of contributions from private equity firms, and they were getting heavy lobbying from private equity firms not to close that carried interest loophole. So where do we go from here? What's the timetable? Okay, so after it passes the revote in the House, there will be that post-vote celebration at the White House. The bill will then be enrolled and sent to the president. That could take a couple of days, so he may not get it till Friday, maybe even the weekend. Then there is a White House review, which may take until the middle, potentially the end of next week. I'm told that the president really wants to sign this before the new year, so he may have the bill sent down to Mar-a-Lago. There may be an event somewhere outside of Mar-a-Lago to sign it, and then a big post-signing event the first week of January here in Washington, D.C., when everybody comes back. With tax reform behind him, the president will get started on his 2018 agenda, which includes rebuilding America's infrastructure, and then some thorny issues like immigration reform and welfare reform. You heard Peter Doocy mention that Jeff Flake says they're going to tackle DACA reform in January. He says he's got a commitment from Leader McConnell to start taking it up at least in January. It's got to be fixed by March. That's the president's timetable. I'm also being told by sources that the White House expects that there will be a 4-week continuing resolution to fund government agreed on before the Christmas break. They also fully expect that that will include what are called so-called pay-go waivers, which would waive any cuts to entitlements like Medicare to pay for tax reform. Chad Pergram reports that there's some resistance from Democrats in Congress to do that. And if they don't get those pay-go waivers, Heather, all that would do would be to delay the signing of the tax reform bill until early 2018, because that, and it's a kind of a Byzantine and arcane process, delay those pay-go cuts until 2019. But if they can't get an agreement in the CR for those pay-go cuts, watch for the president to sign this bill before the end of the year.
Heather? I know they definitely want to make sure they do everything correctly and by the book from this point moving forward.
Yeah, they want this to be a winner. There's no question about that.
Thank you, John. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
Heather.
Bye.
You too.
So if Congress gets tax reform cleared, and we should know the answer to that in an hour or so, there's another hurdle facing lawmakers: funding the government. And time is running out with a deadline at 11:59 Friday night, or the government begins to shut down. But the tax bill is priority one.
After 8 straight years of slow growth and underperformance, America is ready to take off. Stock market is up. Optimism is high. Coupled with this tax reform, America is ready to start performing as it should have.
What a disgrace. That's what this bill is. It's an absolute disgrace.
So, what are the odds of a shutdown? Jake Sherman is senior writer for Politico, and he joins me now. Obviously, Congress just managed to roll a big boulder uphill in getting this tax reform approved. We expect, it's going to be a mere formality when the House votes on it in an hour or so. Now we've got the shutdown looming. What are the chances that it happens?
Very low at this point, but think about it. So yes, tax reform is done, and that's a huge accomplishment for the Republicans who control Congress and the president. We'll see, obviously, what happens in the midterm elections in about a year from now. We'll see if people feel that they have more money in their pocket, which would be very advantageous for Republicans who obviously faced headwinds in a midterm election. But as you noted, the shutdown does loom. Now, Republicans basically want to fund the government from Friday until the end of January. So they want to punt a whole host of big issues that they planned on addressing this month, which is removing budget caps to bolster military and domestic spending. They talked about fixing DACA, doing some immigration reform. All of these things are pushed into next year under this plan that's currently right behind me. The House Republican leadership is meeting and discussing all of these things. So I'd put the odds as low, but there is going to be some turbulence over the next day and a half, 2 days before this gets done.
A lot of animosity between the parties right now. I mean, this budget deal has been passed completely along party lines. Would Democrats want to lend a hand at all to get the government up and running, prevent a shutdown, or does it depend on, what kind of goodies get hung on the tree?
I don't think Democrats are going to be participants in this. Well, we'll see. I think it really depends on how many Republicans come out and vote for this government funding measure. If a bunch do and it's clear that it could pass, Democrats will probably pile on and help get it across the finish line. If not, Democrats are going to make Republicans sweat. And it's not the best example of, great government and people singing Kumbaya, but this is what parties in the minority do. They try to make things difficult for parties, for the people in the majority. Republicans did it when they're in the minority. Democrats are doing it now. So kind of typical Washington fare. But I would assume at this point, and these are famous last words, but I do think that they avoid a shutdown.
Yeah. Well, you have been covering Congress for quite a while now. You've seen a lot of the big battles there. Give us a sense of what has been all but accomplished now in the passing of this tax legislation.
I will give Paul Ryan and the president and Mitch McConnell and Kevin Brady, the Ways and Means chairman, deserve an enormous amount of credit here, because this is a process that usually takes several years. It has in the past taken several years. They really put the pedal to the metal, so to speak. And I think a lot of it was due to the fact that they don't have any big legislative accomplishments. Mm-hmm. Yes, the president has stacked the judiciary, which has been well covered, but the House doesn't have anything to do with that. So I think they felt like they needed to get something done. And in this one bill, they've done a lot. They've cut taxes for corporations and individuals. They have opened parts of Alaska for drilling for the first time in a long time. They have gutted a main part of the health care law. So this is, if you're a Republican and you look at this package, this is a big deal. This has been a huge accomplishment. One person that we can't forget here is Vice President Mike Pence, who drew on relationships that he had for more than a decade as a member of Congress and helped get this across the finish line.
Did some arm twisting for sure. Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico. Jake, thanks.
Thanks, John.
Gentle arm twisting.
Okay,
of
gentle.
course.
All right.
Well, let's talk about that massive wildfire in Southern California. It's getting closer to full containment. That's good news. Wind crews think that they will get this very dangerous fire under control. Plus, the deputy FBI director grilled for hours on Capitol Hill over claims of anti-Trump bias in the Russia investigation. What lawmakers learned from Andrew McCabe, if anything. Plus, we're waiting for the House to hold its final vote on the tax bill. The countdown is on, and we'll bring you that live when it happens.
I think seeing's believing. When workers in the United States see their paycheck, their take-home money go up in February, I think there will be a huge change in sentiment.
Well, on average, everybody's going to benefit. The average tax cut for families, for your viewers, the median family of four in America is going to get a $2,059 tax cut. So that's real money for real people who are really struggling.
That is Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, of course, talking about how the tax plan benefits Americans. The Senate approving the bill very, very early this morning, and the final House vote will be today. again. If passed, it heads to the White House, giving President Trump the Christmas gift that he was hoping for. So let's dig in a little bit deeper about what all this means. And joining me now is Georgia Congressman Doug Collins. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Well, Heather, we're glad to be with you. It's a great day.
You've been very busy over there. So let's get right to what people care about the most. Who will see more money in their pocket and when?
Well, the majority of Americans are going to see money in their pockets. And just like you had just a second ago, the speaker actually talking about the median income at $70,000 couple, when they're going to see $2,000 more in their pocket, that's the kind of growth that we're looking for. That's the kind of things that when come February, when they see this in their paycheck, they're going to know that what we're talking about here actually matters to the American public. And that's what we've been doing all along.
So why the difference in opinions? Listen to what Steny Hoyer had to say last night on Special Report.
The main issue is this is a bad bill. It's a bad bill for our country. It's going to create great debt. And it's perverse in the sense that it gives some 83% of the tax cuts to the wealthiest in America.
You know, he's not alone. We also hear, benefits going to the top 10% of earners. We had Nancy Pelosi saying it's shoddily written. It's a tax scam. And then, of course, Chuck Schumer said it blows the whole deficit. It threatens Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So are they lying? Who's telling the truth?
Well, look, Nancy Pelosi talking about any bill being shoddily written, I mean, that's a pretty large leap right there, because when you consider health care and everything else she's been a part of. But let's just look at it. The problem here is a focus on difference. We have a progressive tax system. We all know that. We've had that progressive tax system for years. It taxes you at the rate of income in which you've succeeded at. The problem here is not the tax code. The problem here is they want to politicize the tax code because they believe that government is a much better way to spend people's money. They believe that the money taken out of people's wallets and sent to Washington, D.C. to fund programs that they like is a much better use in doing that. And so what they're trying to do is just simply play off programs. They don't want to talk about their ideology. They don't want to talk about the fact that they believe it to be better. What they're simply saying is, one, we didn't do it, so we don't like it. Number two is, we're not being very honest with the American people to say on how they get the benefits and how they don't. But I will say this, come February, let them look some of their constituents in the eyes and say, I really didn't want you to get that money back in your paycheck. We could spend it better. That'll be an interesting argument.
It will be interesting because Chuck Schumer said Republicans will rue the day that they voted for this. You talked about spending money. Now, this bill does add to the deficit, $1 trillion to the deficit. How do you plan to pay for that?
Well, that's based on the fact of you're looking at it right now is everything stays the same. I personally don't want to see this economy stay the same. I don't want to see the 1% growth that the Obama administration begun to seem to be in love with because they never did anything about it. They never looked forward to a growth economy. This tax reform provides growth. This tax reform provides our businesses and our job opportunities to have growth, which fuels income, which fuels growth in reducing our debt. So I think when you look at it, you got to look at the total picture and not a static view of if everything stayed the same right now.
All right, one more thing, and I have to ask you this. I know your wife was a lifelong educator in Georgia. My sister is a teacher in Georgia. I was reading from one of your local papers, an op-ed, and this statement was made. Tell me if this is true. When teachers can deduct school supplies, when teachers cannot deduct school supplies, but corporations can, it's just shameful. Is that true?
Well, no, the teachers can. We left that in there. Teachers can still deduct, but also for that letter writer, let me ask you something. Do they take into the account that a single taxpayer is going to have their standard deduction raised from $6,000 to $12,000? They take a married couple like my wife and I, she's been teaching for 28 years, and my love of my life is with me today. She looks at this and says, we're getting from $12,000 to $24,000 for families like us.
Okay.
What it again is ideological and a fear mongering from the Democratic leadership on down.
All right, yeah, and Republicans need to work on getting the other message out. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Have a good day.
Heather, it's great to talk to you. Take care.
Great.
Well, the deputy director of the FBI grilled for 8 hours behind closed doors about charges of anti-Trump bias in the Russia investigation. What lawmakers learned from Andrew McCabe. Congressman Matt Gaetz joins us moments from now.
Welcome back. Just in, the Thomas Fire in Southern California is now the second largest wildfire in the history of that state. Now, the massive blaze, it has caused the deaths of at least 2 people. One of them was a firefighter, and it has destroyed more than 1,000 homes and other structures since it started more than 2 weeks ago. It's now 55% contained, but officials think that the fire, which is burning near some seaside communities in Santa Barbara County, will not be fully contained for at least another 2 weeks.
Well, right now, new action linked to the Russia investigation, with the Senate Intelligence Committee getting ready to interview Bruce Ohr tomorrow. He is the senior Department of Justice official who was demoted after it was revealed he had a meeting with Fusion GPS. That's the firm behind the anti-Trump dossier you've heard so much about. This comes on the heels of Andrew McCabe's testimony behind closed doors. The FBI deputy director was grilled over anti-Trump bias allegations.
We need to get rid of the bad apples in there, and we need them to come testify how they were trying to influence, whether it's the Hillary investigation, and that goes back years, as well as the election itself.
Joining us now, Congressman Matt Gaetz. He is a Republican from Florida. You're not very happy with the FBI's behavior in all of this lead up to the announcement of Bob Mueller's investigation and so forth.
Well, the senior levels of the FBI have been infected with an intractable bias that seemed to favor Hillary Clinton and work against President Donald Trump. Andrew McCabe gave testimony yesterday to behind closed doors, but we're calling for open, sworn testimony under oath so the American people can see the truth about what's going on. Andrew McCabe was present when the FBI's senior leadership hatched a scheme to deprive Donald Trump the presidency both before and after his election. That is totally unacceptable, and it poses a clear and present danger to our democracy. That's why we've got to expose the truth.
Is that are you referring to the meeting in Andy's office that is contained in those Peter Strzok texts to his mistress?
Absolutely. That's right. Peter Strzok was texting his mistress that he praised her for the plan that she hatched in Andy's office. So the current deputy director of the FBI is a key witness in a potential scheme to deprive President Trump of his ascension to the office he was elected to serve in. It's absolutely outrageous. This is the very same Andrew McCabe who wrote the emails designating the Hillary Clinton investigation as special and different than any other investigation that would go through the Washington area. And so time and again, we see this pro-Hillary bias, this anti-Trump bias, and the American people will only have confidence restored if we have open, sworn testimony under oath before God and everyone to find out what happened and what we need to do to make sure that it never happens again.
So you want to take some of the wraps off this information that's being given, for instance, to the Senate committee behind closed doors. You want to bring it out in the open to the Judiciary Committee right there in front of the television cameras.
Absolutely. And Chairman Bob Goodlatte has made a commitment to members of the committee that subpoenas will be going out for Peter Strzok, for his mistress, Miss Page, for Bruce and Nellie Ohr, and also for Andrew McCabe. And so I think we're going to have a very busy schedule, and I think this is critical to the preservation of the country. We cannot live in a world where a bunch of bureaucrats can sit around and scheme about how to deprive the American people of their duly elected president.
But can they say, look, the Mueller investigation is still underway. We cannot testify. We cannot talk to you about some of these matters until Director Mueller completes his investigation.
Well, that's where we need the Attorney General to step up and do his job. The Mueller investigation has been proven to be biased. The American people know it's biased. Even Harvard University released a poll showing that 54% of Americans deem this to be an investigation riddled with conflicts of interest. And so it's time for Bob Mueller to put up or shut up. If there's evidence of collusion, let's see it. If there's not, let's move on as a country and let's institute reforms at the FBI so that an egomaniac FBI director like James Comey cannot depart from the normal standard procedures that guarantee all Americans equal treatment under the law. That is the organizing principle of our effort. Equal treatment, not special bias or special treatment for anyone.
People put their money where their heart is, and a lot of the people on the Mueller team put their money with Hillary Clinton.
Well, absolutely. Over half of the members of Mueller's team contributed to Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, or both. Mueller's number 2, Andrew Weissmann, attended Hillary Clinton's election night party. I guess we can't call it a victory party because she lost, but he was at the party. I mean, you can't imagine how disturbing that is. We've got thousands of qualified federal prosecutors, and Bob Mueller has to pick as his number 2 someone who was at the Clinton election night party. It's outrageous, and it shows that there is a bias that is intractable, and it's infectious, and it can't be cured. And so we need to see the evidence Mr. Mueller has obtained. We need to find out to what extent it may have been tainted by the bias of his team members. And then we need to move on and get past this. But that will only happen if Attorney General Sessions stops being a spectator and actually steps up and leads the Department of Justice and shuts down this biased investigation.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
You're right. He's very fired up.
Yes, he is.
A lot to say. Well, was the engineer in the Washington train derailment distracted? People asking that question today. And could available technology have actually prevented that deadly crash? The latest on the investigation in just moments. Plus, the first major overhaul of the tax code in a generation is on the verge of reaching President Trump's desk as we await one final House vote.
I'm a little surprised the Democrats all decided voting against middle-class tax relief and making American businesses more competitive was a smart vote. And that's an argument we're more than happy to have going into the fall election as well.
A Fox News alert for you now. Federal investigators in the deadly Amtrak wreck want to know whether the engineer might have been distracted by a second person in his cab as that train hit a curve at more than twice the speed limit. Claudia Cowan live in DuPont, Washington with details on this and another concern for investigators. Claudia?
That's right, John. Another big question here is why Amtrak launched its new high-speed service before activating speed control technology that might have prevented a derailment like we saw here on Monday. Now, this technology is known as positive train control, and it's able to stop or slow down a speeding train. And Amtrak's president says it is critical for rail safety.
We are huge supporters of positive train control. We have all of our capital allocated to get it done.
And Anderson said the system should be in place on this stretch of track by next spring. Congress has ordered the nation's railroads to install this technology, but under pressure from the railroad industry, a 2015 deadline was pushed to the end of next year.
National Transportation Safety Board has been begging the railroad industry to implement positive train control. And every time it gets close, our Congress pushes it back. It pushes it back, and it keeps doing that. And realistically, thousands of lives we've lost because we don't have this positive train control.
Another possible factor, human error. Federal investigators say at the time of the accident, the engineer operating the train was helping a conductor become more familiar with the new route. Remember, this was this train's maiden run between Seattle and Portland. Given it was traveling 50 miles over the speed limit, there's concern the engineer may have been distracted. Investigators say they hope to interview him and the rest of the crew in the next few days. And as you can see here live, still lots of activity at the scene of the derailment. It looks more like a construction site than a freeway as crews work to remove a locomotive and make sure that this roadway is safe, the pavement, the guardrails, the overpasses and so forth, before they reopen it to traffic. They're hoping, they say, to open one, maybe two lanes later today, John. They say they have their fingers crossed.
Yeah, what a job to get that back up and running. Thanks very much, Claudia Cowan in DuPont, Washington.
Hey, Fox News alert for you as the House prepares for a final vote on the tax bill. Some political analysts warn that Democrats that their resistance to the process could backfire on them next year. Fox News political editor Chris Stirewalt saying this in an op-ed. In order to effectively challenge Republicans in 2018, Democrats will first have to admit the low condition to which the party has fallen. And if the Republicans' ability to pass this tax legislation does not convince Democrats of their current station, nothing will. So let's bring in our panel. Capri Cafaro is the executive in residence at American University School of Public Affairs and a former Ohio Senate Democrat minority leader. And Vince Colanese is the editorial director at the Daily Caller and host of WMAL's Mornings on the Mall. Got all that out. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Capri, ladies first here. This is good news for Republicans if they pass it.
Well, they are fulfilling a promise, as Speaker Ryan said. But here's my word of caution. If we recall, back in 2010, when the Democrats who controlled both the White House and Congress passed through Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, basically along party line votes, you had to pass it to know what was in it. You had to, implement it so the people of the United States would decide that they liked it. And guess what happened? Obamacare became a lightning rod in the 2010 election, and Democrats lost. And I think that this could be a very similar scenario for Republicans in 2018 because, let's face it, the process that the Republican-controlled White House and Congress looks exactly like what happened with the Democrats in 2010.
Vince, is it about process or is it about results? What do Americans care about? If they start to see more money in their pocket, that's good news.
Look, in the case of Obamacare, to Capri's point, you were compelling people, forcing people to spend money rather than letting them keep more of their own. I think this is the complete opposite of what Obamacare was. And in the case of this tax cut, what you're going to see is Democrats are going to have an impossible time of explaining why it's a bad thing that 80% of Americans just received a tax cut and are seeing that real money in their paychecks. That'll be very compelling. I think the media campaign sort of against this tax cut, joined by the Democratic Party, has been very aggressive and effective so far. 75% of Americans either think they'll get no change to their taxes or they'll actually get a tax increase. And that's not true. 80% of Americans will see a tax cut, and they'll see that pretty quickly come February.
Yeah, we talked about that briefly with Congressman Collins. We talked about the messaging that Republicans need to get out there because only about 20% think that the tax plan is good so far. Capri?
Right. Well, look, I mean, again, I think that part of the issue back with the Affordable Care Act was a disastrous message coming out of the White House. And, ultimately, the proof will be in the pudding, as my mom would say. And if Americans, if middle-class Americans actually do end up with more money in their pockets, and if corporations really do, invest their tax breaks into hiring new people, investing in capital, and that actually occurs, then fantastic. We really have to wait and see how it really goes into effect.
One thing that we don't have to wait on, we do know that the economy is booming overall right now. 2.2 million jobs are created. The GDP is not grown at this level since 2004.
But wages are still stagnant.
And so I wanted to ask you, Vince, what does that mean in terms of latching onto that? I mean, Republicans can use that moving forward.
It means that the Democrats don't have a case against Trump as being a poor effect on the economy at all. I mean, the economy is, they believe that Obama deserves credit for getting us in this direction. They can make that argument. But the fact is, Trump is sitting in the White House right now. The strength of this tax bill and the anticipation of it has really risen the market to record levels. And I think everyone's undervaluing how horrific the Democratic stake is in this election. They have 26 Senate seats to defend this year, whereas Republicans have just 8. And 10 of those Democratic seats are states that Trump won last time.
Yeah.
So
including my home state of Ohio.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you both for joining us. And Ohio, I believe that it was Portman who said the proof is in the pudding. So we'll see what happens. Thank you both. Have a good day.
Never heard that before.
Proof in the pudding.
President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, sparking protests in the West Bank. Now the UN is planning to vote on a resolution criticizing the president's move. The strong words our UN ambassador Nikki Haley has for countries that don't support the United States on this one. Also, a deadly bus crash in Mexico. What we now know about the Americans on board.
Somehow he went down on the right side of the coast of the road. Then when the driver pushed it over and started flipping all over, and then the bus flipped on his side.